Thanks for joining us again today. My name's Matt Hilland. I'm a financial planner at Arm Remote Wealth Management. Also with me today is Quinn Arnold, who's going to be presenting for the first half of this or so. Our topic today is an introduction to retirement communities. And before COVID, we'd actually started getting some information together on this topic for clients. We did several interviews with some local communities, did tours with some local communities. And so we wanted to share some of the information that we found that we thought would be useful to our clients, and then also share where we believe we can have some value in helping you think through some of this if this is an option you're considering in retirement. First, just a couple of quick housekeeping items. Right now, everyone's on mute. At the end of the presentation, if you have any questions that you want to ask, please feel free to unmute yourself. We'll have plenty of time to take questions then. You can also enter any questions at any time in the chat box. We'll be watching that and can answer either publicly or privately. And of course, if there's something you don't want to ask in front of a group on the webinar, please feel free to call or email us or just add this to our meeting agenda next time we meet, and we're happy to talk through any of this with you. So with that, Quinn's going to get us started off talking about retirement communities. And Quinn, take it away.
All right. Thanks, Matt. Hi, everyone. This is Quinn. And like Matt said, we're excited to finally talk a little bit more with clients about this. One of the first things that we wanted to get into are those main differences between retirement communities and how we think about this as planners and help people that we've seen need to find care either for themselves or for a parent or even a grandparent in some cases. So the first thing here to know about retirement communities is that they will have a spectrum of care that they specialize in. And it's important that for you, as you're shopping around and trying to find the right community, that you understand the full services that they can provide and how their community may be different from another one that you're looking at. So the four general areas that a retirement community will talk about providing are independent living, assisted living, memory care, and then skilled nursing care. And independent living is perhaps the easiest to describe. These tend to be an apartment or a unit, sometimes a condo type unit, that are generally part of a larger building in some sense. They are specifically designed for people who are aging. They will have, sometimes larger doorways, no steps, things that facilitate people as they age to be more comfortable in the living environment. And there is usually no additional care provided by a nurse or some kind of healthcare provider or a CNA, a certified nurse assistant with independent living. Assisted living is that step beyond independent living where there's some sort of care provided, either assisting with things like the daily types of living needs. So this would be things like dressing, preparing your own food, toileting, as well as there's a number of other things that an assisted living facility will specifically say that they're able to provide to residents. And that's a class of service that's above and beyond independent living. So many facilities provide those two things together, independent living and assisted living. You may be in a different apartment if you move to assisted living, but not necessarily. Then there are added levels of care, and those are memory care and skilled nursing care. So memory care is exactly what it describes. This would be for people who are suffering with Alzheimer's or dementia and need specialized facilities and care to assist with memory or cognitive issues. Skilled nursing care will be something that we traditionally think of as a nursing home. That's maybe the terminology we would have thought of in the past. And skilled nursing care involves a very high level of service, typically provided by medical staff, and that will be in conjunction usually with a doctor's orders about the needs for the patient. And so that's the highest level of care. The main thing to know about this different spectrum of care is that the transition between these levels of care can be very stressful. And our recommendation is that you should think through that transition and plan for a full spectrum community. And what do I mean by that? So in terms of independent living and assisted living, those are the easiest communities to find. They also tend to be the most attractive because they can have lots of amenities. It's very easy to see yourself living there. However, if your health situation or your loved one's health situation changes and you require memory care or skilled nursing care, a lot of those facilities will just not handle that. And you're left with a situation in which it can be very hard to find a place to live because the places that do provide memory care and skilled nursing care are typically in high demand. The other issue is that you would have to move. And so you may be very attached to the community where you have independent living and assisted living, but then you're going to find yourself in a situation where you have to leave that place and go to another place, and the move is stressful, the transition communities is stressful, and so we suggest anticipating that and finding a place where you can get the full spectrum of care and starting with that kind of decision. So that's the big difference here. There are secondary considerations. There's going to be things like on-site services with dining, the activities they provide, if they have a salon or massage provided, the laundry situation. There are also considerations that Matt's going to get into here in a little bit about how you pay. A lot of people, we have to say when we talk with people, the how you pay becomes such a primary consideration for them. They don't think about some of the other things like the spectrum of care, and we think that's a mistake. So it's important to really think about how you pay, but that's something that's a little easier to think through. And then along with that are things like financial condition of the community, meaning like how financially stable is the retirement community that you're going into, as well as community satisfaction. How happy are people that live there today? So you really need to plan for tours of the community, talking with other residents that live there, spending a day there, or at least some amount of time to have a meal, look around, attend some activities. That's a really big thing that you can do ahead of time, and it really makes a difference in helping to find the right place. Matt, will you advance the slide? Okay, so we spoke just a little bit about this on the previous slide, but I want to stress here before we get into the financial considerations that Matt's going to go into in a good amount of detail. We want you to be thinking about how do you choose the community based on your healthcare needs. And so we mentioned the spectrum of care here, and it's really important to think about current health versus future healthcare needs. And we're in the investment advice business, so we're pretty comfortable talking about the future and how we don't always know the future, but we should plan ahead for that. The same thing goes for your health. And so we all hope for health for a long time in retirement, but the reality is that our health level tends to fluctuate over time. And especially as you get older, minor things can become more major health considerations quickly. So the primary things here to think through are who determines that level of health. And that's going to be a conversation between you or the resident in the community, the doctor involved, so your primary care doctor or some other doctor who is involved from a care perspective, as well as typically a registered nurse at the community. Frequently, from what we've seen, each community will have a registered nurse in charge who is very active in helping to determine what level of care needs to be provided from a health perspective. The other thing here to be thinking about are, what are your outside assistance options? So the retirement community itself will provide some amount of health care, but then you also want to think about where else might you get care? And what I mean by that is that we've heard anecdotally from a few of the retirement communities that there are communities who will actively encourage residents to get home health assistance, so this is through an outside agency to bring in a home health care worker so that you could stay in an independent living arrangement and not have to move up to a different level of care like assisted living or full nursing care. Full nursing care is a different situation, but assisted living, we've been told that a lot of people try to now kind of skip that level. So imagine that you can't quite handle independent living anymore. Maybe you need help with meals, with medication, with dressing and undressing. Those things it may be possible to skip those activities of daily living by that determination that goes into assisted living by getting outside assistance. So that's a really important thing to think through and also to plan ahead for, because it's not really easy to figure that out. There are a couple other things to be thinking about in terms of healthcare too. So if you are a couple and you need to deal with different health situations, and most of us do. Over time, one or both partners in a couple will have some kind of health situation. And if you are currently in an independent living situation, it may mean that there's an added level of care needed for the spouse. So we went through the situation with a client recently. One spouse was in independent living. The other needed to go to full nursing care due to a fall, a situation where she was just not able to be taken care of in assisted living for a period of time. And that lasted a couple of months. So it's really important to think about how do those considerations for a couple work in here. And another reason that we continue to stress with people that a community that provides the full spectrum of care may be less stressful and less disruptive. That's where this client lived, was in Methwick, and so was able to take advantage of Methwick's full spectrum of care to help out. A similar issue with memory care and Alzheimer's or dementia, you want to be thinking about what is the person's ability today to live independently, and what might that look like a year from now or 5 years from now, and how can we plan ahead with the retirement community so that it's not a stressful transition, and that there are resources available to care for that person as memory issues continue to develop. So those are the key points that we see from a healthcare perspective, some of the decision points that we think are important. Now, because we're financial planners, we're going to talk a little bit about the finances with this. I'm going to hand it back to Matt to go over a few of the different ways that we think about paying for care and what you should anticipate.
All right, thank you, Quinn. And yeah, moving on to the next section here, we're just going to talk briefly about a few financial topics, specific numbers and examples around the retirement communities and those different levels of care that they provide that Quinn was talking about, and just show you some examples of a few financial choices you will have with some of these different communities. And so as Quinn mentioned, retirement communities can vary a lot in what they offer. You have to be a little careful comparing prices, or the sticker price at least, to any retirement communities without reading the fine print, being sure you know what's included, because there can be a lot of differences. The cheapest, kind of window price or sticker price might not ultimately be the cheapest one for you at the end of the day. So that's something, regardless of where you're looking at, it's really important to see what's included, what's not included, and the potential for any increased costs. Quinn talked about briefly that upfront payment option that some communities may have, and that can vary. Even that option can vary depending a lot if that down payment's refundable or not. Some places have a higher upfront payment if you want some of that to be refundable for your estate for later on. Some services might not be included in some of the monthly costs, while some are in others. And so this kind of a la carte version can make pricing a little bit confusing. But just to give you an example on how some of these options can differ just between local communities here around Cedar Rapids, here are prices for independent living options at 2 local communities. And right away, you'll notice, larger upfront cost for some, but the potential for a lower monthly payment. It's worth noting just one more time that Methwick's monthly payment does not include as many services as the others. So the price shown here, you might have a little bit higher just depending on the number of meals that you have and other services that you take advantage of. But still, you can see here how you'll likely have a lower monthly payment, potentially with one, if you're willing to do that larger upfront buy-in compared to a place like Grand Living, which has very low buy-in, essentially just a small application fee, but a higher monthly fee. And you can see that perhaps these options could make one community potentially a better fit than another, depending on your situation. If you're selling your home and have a lot of home equity, having money for a larger upfront payment might not be an issue. Whereas if you don't have as much in liquid assets, but maybe large fixed income from Social Security or pension payments, maybe a community that costs less upfront could be a better fit, even if it has a higher monthly fee. And so that's just one example of some things we can help you think through as you evaluate these communities. But the decisions might not stop there. Now I've added another row on the table of another local community. This is Cottage Grove in the area, who seems to stand out a bit initially with both a higher initial down payment and also a higher monthly payment. So, what gives? Cottage Grove is what's called a life care retirement community. And this offers that same full spectrum of care that Quinn was talking about with Methwick and many other the continuing care retirement communities in the area. But life care is a special subset of the continuing care retirement communities we've talked about so far. And they have a little bit of an interesting payment structure that we thought makes it worth mentioning here, just in an example. Life care communities have larger upfront expenses, both in the buy-in and the monthly costs. But when you sign the contract for this type of a community, you're also signing a contract to lock in or at least reduce any future care expenses. So in other words, while you're paying more each month at Cottage Grove for basic independent living, if you need to move into the nursing care or memory care or even assisted care later, your costs can be substantially lower than non-life care communities. And depending on the contract and depending on the community, your expenses may not even increase at all. And so this is just one potential benefit for couples worried about the prospect of maybe future long-term care expenses or memory care expenses. And just to show all this in an example, we have some numbers here for a 75-year-old couple that moves into a regular retirement community, just independent living at first. And one spouse has a health event at age 80 that requires them to need a much higher level of care. And so just to stress, this is mostly just a hypothetical comparison here. It's based roughly on the Methwick numbers, which is the blue line here, and then Cottage Grove or a life care community, which would be the green line here. The y-axis is the total cumulative cost over time. And so you can see the potential for, if you need a very high level of care sometime in your stay at a retirement community, you have the potential for really rapidly rising increased costs. I think we're familiar with some of these potential for numbers, $80,000 or $90,000 a year at that highest level of care is kind of the potential. But you can see, while a life care community, something like Cottage Grove, will be more expensive early on and will be more expensive if you never need a higher level of care, there is situations where that life care community could end up saving you money in the long run if you need some higher levels of care. And so there's a lot of retirees that find themselves able to comfortably handle, higher monthly costs or a higher upfront cost, but might struggle to handle some really high costs that could occur with memory care or skilled nursing care. And so for those, this is just another thing to consider as you're evaluating local communities, some of the long-term potential costs that you might face. And you can imagine that some of these types of life care communities are becoming popular for this reason. And in fact, some states have even begun regulating some of these communities like they do insurance companies. Quinn had mentioned before some of the secondary considerations looking at the financial strength of the company. And that would be really important, if a life care type of community is something that attracts you, to make sure that you can look at either some state regulator reports or look at the community's financial condition, because it almost gets treated like a long-term care insurance type of contract or expense. And since the potential for long-term care is always a big part of the retirement community decision, and we think should be part of your consideration in deciding on a community, I just wanted to review some of the costs that for different levels of care and what they can be, maybe outside of that life care type of community. These numbers come from Genworth, which has some useful tools and data on their website. If you're ever interested, you can search based on any local city. You can see historic inflation rates. But just to give you a general idea, here in the Cedar Rapids area, assisted living on average about $44.50 a month, and nursing home can vary between $6,500 and $7,500 per month. And so that brings us to one other common question about these retirement communities, and that's, how does my long-term care insurance fit, or should I keep my long-term care insurance if I'm thinking about a retirement community? And, in general, we say yes. We think long-term care insurance is something good to consider if you have a policy, probably worth at least thinking about keeping it. The important item here is that if you begin to tour communities, you find one or two that you are really impressed with that are kind of leading candidates, provide them your long-term care insurance policy. Most of these communities handle working with these types of insurers a lot, so they're going to be really familiar with how your policy would pay, what would need to happen to trigger those policies, and how they can even structure their monthly bills or their contract to make sure that when the policy is triggered, it will pay out, a certain amount when you need it. And so lastly, just getting into how we help with this situation. We hope some of this information is just important for you to know. Obviously, some of this with specific features, we're not going to be really valuable in finding, the best one. That's kind of something personal. But where we can help is looking at, just for example, how long-term care insurance comes into play, either the policy you have with a community that you're considering, or whether you should get, long-term care insurance as you're moving into one of these communities or beginning to retire. And that can be a complicated just analysis based on your need. That's just based on your assets and your income, and finding the right policy. There's all sorts of different choices with coverage amounts, elimination periods, inflation protection. And so that's something, we believe we can provide a lot of value to help you walk through. And then also, as you're starting to look at retirement communities, we can help give you peace of mind knowing that your plan can handle any expenses, making sure you're in a community that you're happy with for the long run, that you can see yourself aging in, that you can be comfortable there through all those levels of care. We can help, just put you at ease that what you're doing is sustainable and well within, the metrics of your plan. And then also just withdrawal plans. Some places have, for example, higher down payment requirements, or might offer higher down payment in exchange for lower monthly fees. They have lots of different payment options usually, so we can help you talk through that and see if there's a better option for you with your finances. Lastly, just to end here, we've put this out in, I think, some prior email newsletters, but we did do some interviews and some tours with local retirement communities in the area and kind of packaged it just into a PDF for you. So if you haven't received that and you're interested in it, just reach out to us and we'll have either a copy for you in our next meeting or can email a copy to you. We'll also have a few paper copies in the office here soon, so you can even just stop by and pick one up. But the guide runs through some basic questions to ask. So regardless of where you're looking at, you'll be knowledgeable and know just what to ask, what to look for in the answers. And then we provide those answers for 4 communities in the area. So you can kind of just get a general sense in how communities differ and some basic information on costs. I think just a couple places were upfront with some costs. Others you might have to reach out for to get specific information, and just some general advice on paying for care and insurance options. So again, reach out if that guide would be helpful. We're happy to provide it. That's all we had for today. If you had any questions after this, please follow up after this. And if we don't hear from you, have a great weekend. And thanks again for joining.